Welcome to the Triage Method podcast. I'm Gary McGowan. This is my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell, sipping on his freshly brewed cup of Joe in his Starbucks cup, supporting capitalism and slave labor. It's disgusting. Meanwhile, I'm supporting IKEA up the Swedes yurt. And yeah, this week, we're going to be chatting about more nutrition topics again. We've got a couple more to go, but we're going to be getting some experts, or at least people who are maybe somewhat smart, on the podcast in the coming weeks to discuss some more specific topics. But before that, we want to kind of cover our bases in terms of like this being a series of how to set up your nutrition podcast. So, Paddy, what's the crack? How are you keeping? Did you die yet?
No death yet. This is being recorded on Sunday, and obviously it'll be out on Monday, but you could be listening to it in the future, or the past, who knows. But there was on Friday night a lockdown, even further, basically a military martial law state.
It's beautiful. You love to see it.
So I'm basically quarantined in my house because I live in Dublin, so they don't really care about the rest of the country. They care about Cork to an extent, but basically it's only Dublin that matters. So all the Garda in the fucking world are out enforcing people to stay in their houses. You walk out, they're like, "Do you have ID on you?
Do you have ID, sir?
Where are you going?" It's like the fucking Stasi or something.
You from Soviet Union?
So yeah, that's the situation we are in right now. It's quite funny, to be fair. You're only allowed 2 kilometers from your house, up to 2 kilometers,
Radius.
You hate to see it, but anyway, look, it is what it is, and it'll be only be enforced for another 2 weeks or so, hopefully, and we get by. And like realistically, both of us, we have an internet-based business, so while it's completely annoying, whatever, because gyms are closed, our jiu-jitsu clubs are closed, our fucking business is hitting economic dire straits because, again, this is normally a busy time, the lead up to summer. People are like, I want to get shredded, need some coaching, need some help. Now people are like, I'm stuck inside, don't want to get the corona. So yourself, that obviously affects our business. So having said all of that, as I said in the last podcast, I don't want the next few weeks to just be, let's just talk another thing about the coronavirus or another thing about the coronavirus. Realistically, who cares? As long as you're not dying from it, you probably don't want to hear about the coronavirus anymore. Probably hear it on the news, probably your friends talk about it, your family talk about it, and you don't want to listen to a podcast about it, right? So with that in mind, today's podcast is going to be on a topic that we did actually cover. Well, we touched on a few weeks ago, but we're going to discuss it from a different angle today. And the topic is body recomposition, right? And so we're going to do a little bit of a brief background of body recomposition, what it means, who does it occur in, all that kind of stuff. But we have covered that before, right? And so we're not going to go a big deep dive on that. However, what we are going to do is talk about how you can set up your nutrition to potentially achieve this, right? Because that is something that is kind of left out of the discussion quite often, because body recomposition doesn't occur in like such a large percentage of the population. It's very specific to certain populations that they're kind of not served, because it's like, oh, well, I could write a load of content about body recomposition, but it's only going to help, maybe 0.5% of all the people that are out here lifting weights and trying to change their body composition, so they kind of get left behind. The discussion of how to set things up and all that kind of stuff, they're kind of left to their own devices, and they may not be setting it up correctly for what they want to achieve, right? So we're going to discuss it from a nutritional point of view, like how you would actually go about things if body recomposition was the goal. It's actually quite simple, but there are some considerations around how you progress things as the body recomposition occurs, because it's one thing to just set up a plan of action and be like, right, let's just see what happens, but you want to have a plan of action that you can progress and change over time so that you can continue to get results, so that's what we're going to discuss today. So I suppose to start it off, Gary, could you just give us a brief rundown of what body recomposition actually is?
Yeah, so body recomposition, the way I think about it, is basically the concomitant increase in muscle mass and loss in body fat, pretty much. So basically where those two things are occurring simultaneously. I mean simultaneously kind of on the macro day-to-day level. On the micro level, I think one of the things that's important actually to understand, especially if you're a trainer, is that these processes occur via independent signaling. So like anabolic signaling, the process of muscle proteins being synthesized, is different to the process of fat being mobilized from your stored body fat and being oxidized for fuel. So they're actually separate things. And I think that can help you in terms of understanding how those things can actually happen together. Because I think one of the things that happens sometimes when people think about everything in terms of calories in and calories out and nothing beyond that, is that they think that, all right, if you're in a surplus, then it's just permanent anabolic signaling, and that's the way it works. However, that's not the case. It's still on and off and on and off, just to a different degree that's more in favor of being net anabolic to all of your bodily tissue. So note on the micro level, different signaling processes, but on the macro level, those two phenomena are occurring basically at the same time. So this generally takes place where someone is just maintaining their body weight. So you're eating roughly at maintenance, and kind of on average, you're more or less staying at the same body weight. That body weight might change slightly because obviously there's different calorie contributions between adipose tissue, stored muscle glycogen, stored muscle proteins, and the respective processes that leads to each of those being synthesized. So you may see some changes in body weight, even though you're more or less kind of eating around maintenance. So that's basically what you're going to see. And over time, what that looks like is generally someone progressing towards a better physique. So I have one client who actually just sent me some pictures yesterday at kind of our 12-week mark. And he's actually the perfect kind of example of someone who has recomped to some degree, because he was coming back from injury. He hadn't been lifting properly. And at the moment now he's looking much leaner, but much more muscular as well. So that's kind of us more or less eating around maintenance. So in that case, you basically have more of your calories being partitioned, you could say, towards the muscle building process than towards the fat building process. And that comes as a result of basically you being more sensitive to anabolic stimuli. So that could be because you're on anabolic steroids. It could be because you're a beginner. It could be because you're coming back from a period of detraining. But a lot of the time, for those of us who are more intermediate and advanced, this probably isn't something that we're going to experience very often, other than specific circumstances, such as if someone was starting a new sport that now trained their neck loads. They might gain loads of muscle in a deficit, and it might look like recomposition. Similarly, if you're never trained your calves before and suddenly you start training your calves loads, you might have a recomp style effect, because although you're in a deficit, you're losing body fat, it seems like your calves have just kind of blown up. So those things can happen, but that's a basic overview of what the phenomenon is.
And it does bear keeping in mind with this that the concept of staying in and around the same weight is part of this body recomposition process, because again, we said it on the previous podcast, I do believe, but if you are losing weight, then you are just dieting, like you know what I mean, like, because people say that all the time. Yeah, people are like, oh, I'm just recomping, and then you ask them how things are going, they're like, oh, I've lost 10 kilos. I'm like, you're just dieting. You're literally just dieting. It's and that is semantic, pedantic. I never know which one of those fucking words is right.
Both are correct.
I'm going to say semantic, but it is like you need to get your words correct. I understand the irony of that, but you need to get your words correct in terms of being able to discuss processes with other like people in the field. Like if I say I'm recomping, like people in the field know what that means. But then if I say I'm recomping and then I tell them the details of it and it's just a diet, it's just like, oh, I lost 10 kilos, then that does influence how people will advise you, that kind of stuff. You're asking for advice and you're like, oh, well, how should I progress this if, I want to continue this recomp? And then people ask you how it's going and you say you've lost 10 kilos. It's like, that's a different thing than a recomp. If you're saying the exact same weight and you're 6 weeks into it and you're like, I've been getting some great recomp effects and muscles are really popping, whatever else. And 6 weeks mark, I don't know how to progress this. And people are thinking of that like, geez, you're actually getting some nice recomp effects. This is what I would do in that situation for, body recomposition. That would be fine if we were talking about the same thing. But if you're like, oh yeah, 6 weeks into a body recomp, results have been great. They're starting to slow. And then we ask about what's going on and you're like, oh, I lost 10 kilos. That's a completely different thing. Like what we do next is completely different than if this was an actual body recomposition, So you have to be clear in what we're actually discussing. So one of the key hallmarks of this is you stay in and around the same weight, Now, obviously there's some natural day-to-day variance and obviously, you might lose a little bit more fat one week and gain a little bit more muscle one week, so like we're not saying it has to be, I was 90 kilos at the start of this and I'm exactly 90 kilos at the end of this, like that's not what we're saying, right? However, there is also the other side of things. You could potentially also be heavier, right? And that, to an extent, like while that would be generally classified as a gaining phase, I would be more likely to keep that in as a body recomposition. If what had happened was you gained an extraordinary amount of muscle and lost an extraordinary amount of body fat, I would generally tend to call, and like say, for example, you were 90 kilos at the start and then at the end of it, you were 92 kilos and you had lost a load of body fat and you had gained a load of muscle. I would be much more likely to call that a body recomposition, rather than if it was the opposite, you lost a load of body fat and gained very little muscle. I'd be like, that's just the diet, and the reason being for that is because that is quite often what people visually go to when they look at body recomposition. They'll look at someone that has lost a load of body fat and gained a load of muscle and be like, that's exactly what I want to do, and without perhaps realizing that the only reason that has actually generally occurred is because someone was so detrained, they used to have a load of muscle, maybe they used to lift weights or whatever, and then due to injury or going on holidays or whatever it is, they have not been doing that for the last 6 months or something, so they used to be 92 kilos shredded, and now they're 90 kilos not shredded. But as soon as they start kicking training back up and really progressing it, all of a sudden muscle memory kicks in and boom, they're back up in their muscle mass and their body fat reduces in a linear kind of fashion, right? Or, which is what really confuses this whole issue, and that is that people will just take steroids. They'll take physique enhancing drugs, or I don't even say performance enhancing, just physique enhancing drugs. So they'll gain a boatload of muscle because now the anabolic signaling pathways have just been hyper stimulated because you're on anabolics, and all of a sudden they're gaining muscle like crazy, so even if they're eating the exact same amount of calories, more of that is being partitioned for the muscle building process. And potentially even that muscle building process is so calorie intensive, they're actually eating into fat stores, and as a result, that those fat stores are being used for the energy that's needed for all these anabolic processes. So they're building muscle at a crazy rate and they're burning fat at a crazy rate, and that's unfortunately what most people see as body recomposition. They'll see someone and they'll be like, man, look at his shoulders, they just blew up, they got fucking really rounded, they're proper capped, look at his traps, they look great, his chest is popping, whatever, they'll literally look at it and they'll be like, he went from this guy who's just this average physique at whatever, 80, 90 kilos, whatever the weight is. And then it's like, oh man, he actually gained 2 kilos of muscle, but he got this complete body recomposition where he just lost all of the body fat that he had. And it looks like he just gained pure muscle. And it's like, yeah, that probably did occur. But the only reason it occurred was because he was on fucking a rake load of drugs, So that does have to be factored into the equation. Now, in this podcast, we're going to talk about setting up the nutrition for a body recomposition, right? So that's why we just wanted to get that clear on all those things, because if you do understand all of that and you're like, okay, so body recomposition generally means I'm losing fat and I'm gaining muscle, and they're roughly at the same rate. Obviously it's not the exact same time that that's occurring, but over a day, a week, the kind of process is, okay, I've lost some fat and I've gained some muscle and I'm staying roughly around the same weight and my body is recomposing, right? So we're going to talk about setting up the diet for that. However, we're not going to talk about setting up the diet for that if you are to go on anabolics, because that is a very individual thing. And to be honest, it's like, first of all, you kind of can't fuck it up, because you're literally taking drugs that partition calories so effectively. Like, you actually just have to be gluttonous to fuck it up, so we're not going to touch on it for that reason, but also it's like, it's an individual thing, and quite frankly, like that's not the population that we coach.
Yeah, no.
So we're not going to touch on that. However, there are two populations that, well, we'll say three. There are three populations that we will be serving with this podcast, discussing the nutrition, and for all of them, the process is very similar, right? And for all of them, the process starts with having your training on point, So like this whole discussion is somewhat irrelevant if your training is not squared away. So while this is a nutrition podcast, like this specific episode, it's based on the assumption that you already are doing or know how to train. You already are like progressively overloading your lifts. You're already doing enough volume, intensity, all of that kind of stuff. So if you haven't set up your training correctly, go back, look at all the resources that we have, podcast episodes, or on our site, or the program templates, or whatever the fuck, find out how to set up your program effectively, because the rest of this discussion is completely irrelevant if your training is not on point. Like, the training is the stimulus that's going to change the body. The nutrition is purely there to support it, So with that in mind, there's three populations. First of all, we have the beginner. They have never lifted any weights. They've never done anything, or they've kind of only done a little bit here and there with their mates in, like, maybe their gym, or sorry, maybe their school has a gym set up, and they just, maybe a Friday afternoon they have PE and they're allowed to choose the gym for that. I know that's a common occurrence in some schools, but so maybe you've done a little bit on and off, or maybe you have a like plastic weight set at home, which is probably worth boatloads of money right now. Supply and demand, bro. But yeah, so the beginner, so again, with that population, you're probably going to have to really focus on getting things dialed in, in terms of you've never really trained effectively before, right? So that's the population. And then the other two populations are someone who's just coming back from injury, right? So that's pretty obvious. You've been off for a while due to injury, and the other one is someone who has been off due to life, or whatever. They used to lift back in the day, and maybe 5-10 years ago when they were a teen. Now they're in their 20s. They've built a fucking successful career, whatever, but they're like, I want to start, changing my body. It used to be fucking jacked, and now I'm just, quote unquote normal. So those are the three populations. Now, the beginner, that's a little bit different than the other two. That's why I kind of distinguish them. But with the other two populations, coming back from injury or coming back from a layoff, even a couple of months, couple of weeks, few years, whatever it is.
Post-corona.
Yeah, maybe. Whatever. You're coming back and you want to know, okay, how do I effectively get this kind of body recomposition. I'm relatively happy with the weight that I'm at, and I just want to recompose that body. I want to lose some body fat and gain some muscle, right? So those are the three populations. Is there anyone else that you would add into those populations, young Jerome?
I think that covers most of them. Like, I mean, there's like they're all indirectly there. So yeah, no, I wouldn't add anyone. I'm happy with that.
Perfect. Right. Now, as I said, the actual setup of this is quite easy to do, nutritionally speaking, right? So it's built on a foundation that your training is progressive and on point, right? If that's not the case, then whatever the fuck you do with your nutrition, it's somewhat irrelevant, because you're not providing the trigger, the switch, whatever, that actually initiates this process. Like, you can eat the diet that we're going to recommend here now, and if you don't do any resistance training, you might get some body recomposition effects, but you probably won't. So do keep that in mind. So you have your training on point. So what do we do with our nutrition? Well, it's actually quite simple, and we've covered before in the podcast. It is just eat at maintenance, right? And again, that's such a cop out for the discussion. It's like, just eat at maintenance, but that is effectively how you do this. You just eat maintenance level calories, because again, what we're thinking about when we're thinking about calories and influencing things, calories are influencing our weight, right? So if you eat more calories, you tend to weigh more. If you eat fewer calories, you tend to weigh less, right? So from a caloric perspective, if we want to maintain the weight that we're at, we are going to eat a maintenance amount of calories. Pretty straightforward concept. Like, it should not be hard to wrap your head around that, right? However, what we do have to factor in is that we want to engage in a process that effectively sees us losing weight, but also gaining muscle, right? So perhaps the macronutrient spread of those calories, has to be different than how we would set things up for other diets, right? And that is true to an extent. And effectively what I do, and you're free to disagree with this, Gary, but I treat that maintenance level of calories as if it is a deficit level of calories. And effectively we would treat the diet setup as if we were trying to retain as much muscle as possible while dieting, right? And the thing that generally influences is our protein recommendations. And for me, what I generally do is set them slightly on the higher end of protein intake, for what we generally recommend, which, that's probably going to be somewhere upper end 2.5 grams per kg. That's generally where I would set them if we're just going, I want a body recomposition, right? However, we do also have to factor in the rest of the diet, because what we also want to really prioritize is getting enough carbohydrates in so that you can, perform really, really well, because your training is the stimulus here. So you need to be able to have very good training sessions, and generally that means that you're going to have a relatively high carbohydrate intake to see that occur, and obviously, again, depends on your training setup, depends on your preferences, all that stuff, but as a general rule, carbohydrates are good for performance, so that would be generally how I would set it up. I would just, let's go to the top end of the protein recommendations. Like, again, like, you can have lower if that's your preference or whatever, but I just like it because it gives us somewhat of a buffer, so that if there's more anabolism, there's whatever, we have that available to us. But also, if there is any fat breakdown occurring, like, we don't want those catabolic processes bleeding into muscle, like digging into any kind of muscle that we're accruing. So I like to personally just sleep safe in the knowledge that we are in a surplus of protein, right? Even if we are eating at maintenance calories. However, we also have to factor in how many carbs we're eating into that, because I don't want you going like, oh, my maintenance is 2000 and I'm now eating fucking 200 grams of protein and my carbs are fucking non-existent or whatever the fuck it is, and whatever level of calories that is for you. You know, you're eating such low carbohydrates that your performance is decreasing. You know, like we don't want that to occur, right? What would you say about that, Gary? Is that how you would perhaps conceptualize, think about setting this up?
Yeah, more or less. I think protein's the only one that's even interesting, to be honest. Like, I mean, carbohydrates and fats, it kind of comes back to what we discussed in the previous podcast. Like, just keep your carbohydrates kind of as high as is practical, and take that recommendation more seriously the more active you are, essentially. You know, because I mean, if you don't really care that much about your muscle mass and your performance, but like you just want to be leaner and healthier, like, I'm not going to tell you that eating a higher carbohydrate diet is necessary. Like, that's absolutely not the case. Doesn't mean that we recommend going full keto, but I mean, like, there's no reason why you couldn't be perfectly healthy with a lower carbohydrate type of approach, provided you're still getting in your vegetables, etc., and you're getting in a variety of kind of different types of fat sources, as opposed to all just saturated fat or whatever. So yeah, it kind of depends there, what your actual goal is. But if you're coming to this podcast and you're thinking, man, I want to be as good as I can in the gym, I want to get these body recomposition effects, then carbohydrates, keep them on the higher end of what is possible within the limits of your calorie intake. Then when it comes to the actual protein intake, yes, I would agree. I think keeping it a little bit higher than is necessary is a good idea, because like when you think about, like, I think this is just an important lesson in general, especially as it relates to training studies, is like, if you're getting an average effect from a research study that informs protein recommendations, then, like, let's say our recommendation is, right, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, and that leads to most people in the study being in a good place to build muscle, then that's fine, as our kind of population recommendation. But if you were one of the individuals who happened to actually benefit more from going up to 2 or 2.2 or 2.4 grams per kilo, then like you clearly like kind of want to know that. And therefore, that doesn't mean that we recommend across the board that you go ahead and just go as much as possible just in case, because it's unlikely, very unlikely that you out of everyone are going to need 4 grams per kilo. But when you're already in a muscle building, in that you don't have the surplus on your side, personally, I'd rather have an extra bit of protein on my side if I was worrying about every last gram of muscle. Is it the most important thing? No. But I mean, if you're listening to podcasts that like this about these nuances and you're really trying to take care of all those details, then it might be something that you want to factor in. So rather than staying between 1.6 to 2 grams per kilo, you might want to just edge, slightly above that. Maybe 2 to 2.2 might be a sound approach, or up as far as 2.5. It all kind of depends on where you were previously as well, because obviously if you're coming into this and you've never managed your nutrition, and you're kind of the type of person to get up in the morning, have a bowl of cereal, like lunch you have a sandwich, and dinner whatever your mom puts on the plate, in terms of meat, then you're already going to be increasing your protein intake by even getting to 1.2, 1.4, 1.5. So always keep those things in mind, because like realistically, just get all those things squared away first before focusing on the details. But the details can still be important for some.
Yeah. So effectively, the recommendation is get at least the bare minimum of protein, which is again
Yes.
roughly that 1.8. We'll just say 2 for argument's sake, right? However,
Because why not?
there probably is benefits to having slightly higher, especially if you are trying to get this body recomposition effect. Even if that is, those benefits are purely from a satiety point of view, because eating at maintenance,
Yeah,
people kind of just gloss over this, but eating at maintenance, like that's not necessarily all that filling, you know. Like eating at a surplus isn't necessarily all that filling either, you know. And it all depends on how you actually set those calorie or that food selection up to fit those calories. You know, if you're eating literally like sugar and whey protein, that's probably not all that filling, you know. Excuse me. Even if you do hit your macros and calories, you know. So how you set your diet up, how you pick foods, how you select foods does matter. So just from the perspective of, actually feeling full and satiated, I would generally tend to err on the side of higher protein if we're in this maintenance phase, at least, you know. So that's the main consideration, and that for both injuries, coming back after a layoff, and a beginner, all of that makes sense. However, if you are a beginner, you could basically do everything wrong and just lift weights, and you're probably going to see some sort of a body recomposition effect occurring, right? You're probably going to see some muscle building. Like, you literally are so sensitive to the stimulus, the lifting weights process, that if your training is in any way progressive and in any way set up correctly, you're probably going to see some rather significant muscle building occur. And as a result, if your weight is staying roughly the same, you're going to see some fat loss occur. Like, it's basically like you just went on steroids, right? If you are that rank beginner, right? So you want to obviously milk that for as long as possible, which can be for up to like 2 years. That's probably like, you can still get some fucking fairly significant rate of return as a beginner for the first 2 years of lifting, assuming that your training is set up correctly, assuming that it's progressive and all that kind of stuff. So if you're listening to this and you are a rank beginner and you're like, geez, I actually don't know if my training is set up correctly or whatever, it's like, well, don't waste. I say waste, you can't really waste your life. Don't waste the time and be fucking around in the gym. Just get onto someone, either hire a coach or buy a book, or find out through whatever means possible how to set up a program correctly, get your program set up correctly, understand the basic premise of lifting weights, understand the basic premise of progressive overload, and milk it for all that it's worth. So if you are a beginner, you really can't go wrong unless you do go on this fucking huge hyper dirty bulk, which I just generally don't recommend, because it's not going to lead to more muscle building than would have occurred if you were to eat, just slightly above maintenance or even at maintenance, so that is the case. If you are a beginner, you could argue that eating at in a surplus could still lead to a significant body recomposition effect. It all depends on exactly how young you are in your training career, and then also how receptive to the progress that you are, because some individuals are literally going to just look at weights and build muscle, so that could be you. That's Gary. He's just gets fucking jacked. He just goes into the gym, smells the weights, and all of a sudden he's 20 kilos heavier. That's why he doesn't go to the gym. Just gets too big. But you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be individuals that just are hyper responders. So that could be you. And, you could eat in a surplus and still see some significant fat loss and muscle building occur, So again, you're going to have to individually trial this. Now, that's the basic. I'm just going to wrap that up, because that's the basics of it. You just want to eat at maintenance, and you want to have enough protein. So that's either at least the bare minimum, we'll say 1.8, but basically I would just always recommend between 2 and 2.5. If this was just a generic diet recommendation, my recommendation is 2.2. That's generally where most people fall. Just on, like, that's our starting point, 2.2, right? However, if I want to really push for a body recomposition, and taking into account the satiety, taking into account some fat loss, taking into account that having an excess of protein probably isn't going to cause any issues whatsoever, I probably go for higher on that range. So 2.2 to 2.5 if we are going for a pure body recomposition. However, you don't have to do that if you want. You can just go, all right, I'm going to stick to the 2. It fits my overall lifestyle better. I'm on relatively low calories for maintenance, whatever it is for you as an individual. As long as you're in that kind of range, like, ultimately, it's not such a deal breaker, such a big issue that I'd be like, oh, you're trying to recompose on 2 grams? Oh, no. You can't do that. Like, that's not an issue, as long as you're within that range, you're probably good to go. However, there probably are benefits for a slightly higher intake with this goal in mind, right? Now, that's it. It's as simple as that, right? Eat at maintenance and get sufficient protein. Boom, you get body recomposition if you are in a population that is going to be able to achieve body recomposition, right? So that's that part of the argument, right? And we're going to come back at the just after this next little bit in terms of how do we progress that and how do we keep track of that, because again, as I said, most people are just told how to set it up correctly, and then it's like, well, where do I go from here, so we'll touch on that in a second. However, there is another point that I want to bring up, and that is that there is the potential for populations who aren't the normal body recomposition populations. There is the potential for them to achieve this body recomposition effect, right? And that is, I'm going to say that for the start, first of all, it's the most frustrating process to even try to accomplish this, right? Because results are going to be so slow, right? But you can do this, you just have to look at it over, like, say, a 6 to 12 month time frame, right? And the way you could do this is effectively stagger your caloric intake, right? So that over a week, you are still at maintenance calories, right? But on any given day, you might be in a surplus and you might be in a deficit, right? So what I mean by that is, say, for example, you lift 4 days per week, you do some resistance training 4 days per week. And on those days, you eat a calorie surplus, right? And we'll say it's, I don't know, I'm not going to do the numbers off my head because they're just not going to add up, but whatever it is that allows you to, at the end of the week, be at the same level, like the caloric maintenance. The 4 days you lift, you eat in a surplus. The 3 days you're not lifting, you eat in a deficit, right? So effectively over the week, you have days where you are in a more anabolic state, and then you have days where you're in more of a catabolic state, right? Now, that potentially over time could lead to a little bit of fat loss and a little bit of muscle gain, right? So you could do that, right? And that is something that some people really like to do. They're like, oh, this is how I set up my day. I get to have different calories. I have a different diet, and I get to really, like, I'm either, this is a training day or this is a non-training day, and they like that whole process. However, it is my opinion that you're probably going to see no difference than if you adjust at the same amount of calories on each of those days and ate at maintenance. Now, that's my opinion. There might be people out there that have the opinion that no, this is going to lead to significant fat loss on the deficit days and significant muscle building on the muscle building days, the anabolic days, the surplus days. However, I just don't see it working like that. Like, there's no inherent, magic to the 24-hour cycle. It is just the accumulation of things over time, and at the end of it, even if they are right, they say, the calorie cycling people, even if they are right, like, we're talking such a low level of difference that it's probably indistinguishable, like, that would just be the same as, like, genetic variation. It would be too hard to tell exactly what occurred. You could have just been, more hyped in the gym. You could have taken more caffeine, and that could have been the stimulus that did it. Like, we're talking here, like, grams of muscle and grams of fat loss at the end of the day. Now, that's my personal opinion. Someone might be like, no, I do this with all my clients, and after 6 months of this body recomposition, calorie cycling, they get ridiculously good results. However, I just have a hard time really accepting that, I suppose. So that's my bias. I would just be more in favor of a more consistent calorie level throughout the week. However, I do understand that some people like that up and down approach, that zigzag kind of approach. And I actually don't disagree that there probably is some utility to it. I just don't think that the magnitude of effect is so large that it would be something that I'd be like, no, that is actually exactly how we set up our our recomposition phase. That's exactly what we do. That's my personal opinion. Again, you as an individual listening to this may be like, no, actually, I'm going to try that. I'm going to see if I notice a significant effect. I actually have a twin as well. So he's going to eat at maintenance every single day, and I'm going to eat 4 days in a surplus, 3 days in a deficit, but at the end of the week, have that equal the same amount of calories total for the week between the two individuals, and maybe you notice some significant muscle building and fat loss effects, Personally, I don't think that it would be indistinguishable. What are your thoughts on that, Gary?
Yeah, like I pretty much agree. Like I don't think there's any real reason to believe that you'd see massive differences in body composition between basically overfeeding a couple of days per week and underfeeding other days of the week versus just kind of keeping it consistent across the week. Like again, it could be the case. It's just that, we're kind of, you'd be toing and froing with theories to try and justify one or the other. And I think ultimately the main barrier is not the extra 1%. The main barrier is the behaviors that allow you to achieve the other 99%. And that's really what you have to ask yourself. And if that happens to be the case, that the two, like for example, the anabolic diet is one type of diet that was like used by many bodybuilders, and that's basically where you underfeed or eat a lower carbohydrate approach, I believe, for 5 days of the week, and then 2 days at the weekend you basically indulge a bit more. Like you don't want to have a total crazy massive cheat day binges like some people do that, but I do know some like pretty smart people who be like, they're well into their science and evidence-based stuff, but they still follow that type of approach of 5 days of kind of restriction and 2 days where they just overfeed and enjoy all the meals they want, really, because that allows them to maintain in the long term. So I mean, ultimately, like, nutrition can become very dogmatic in both directions, in that, like, for example, you could be a hard, stern, low carb keto guy, but you could also be a hard, stern kind of, you could say, nutrition nihilist that just says that the evidence suggests that it's just calories and nothing else matters, and just say that we should all eat the same, that it's kind of just this average, track your calories, track your macros, here are the ratios, boom, done. Like, that might be fine for some people, but if you're the type of person that does better on, I don't know, you do a ketogenic diet 5 days per week and then you overfeed on pizza and cereal at the weekend, like, okay, there may be some disordered eating patterns in there. You may not want to teach your kids that, but I mean, if it works for you and it's not having adverse physiological or psychological effects, then please feel free to do whatever you wish,
Dead right, Gary. And that is the thing about nutrition. It is completely dependent on the individual, their beliefs, their practices, even their fucking religion. Like, it's so dependent. Like, there's so much that goes into it beyond just, oh, here are the caloric components to different macronutrients, and we're just going to add them up, and and we got your calories, and see you later. Like, that is obviously a great starting point, and obviously when we're discussing it, it can seem like that's the point that we have. It's like, yeah, just eat your calories and track your macros and whatever, but it's like you have to factor in that we're talking to a general population here, but on an individual level, you would coach nutrition, and that you can do that yourself. You can look at the science, you can look at the recommendations and whatever else, and then adjust from there, based on your unique circumstances, issues, whatever. So that is part of the whole process, right? Now, rather than just descending into a rant or rambling, like we always do, Gary, we have one final thing to wrap up, and this is the progressibility of a body recomposition period, right? Because what inevitably happens is you've been doing this for a couple of weeks, you're like, yeah, I'm actually seeing some significant fat loss. I'm seeing some significant muscle gain. Everything seems to be going well. Again, you've been doing it for 6, 8, 10 weeks. And then you're kind of like, things seem to be slowing down, because inevitably they will. Where do you go from here? And I'm of the opinion, well, actually, before we go into that, we should also say that it also becomes extremely hard to track the rate of progress, like unless you have some sort of scales that does bioimpedance, and even that it's not that accurate, but just so you have some sort of metric that you're tracking, it's very hard to keep track of how things are progressing, like if you're losing, I don't know, 50 grams of fat and gaining 50 grams of muscle per week, like you're not really going to be able to see that, even though technically speaking, you are body recomposing, Um, so that's very hard, like very, very hard to track, now obviously it's easier if you are, losing a kilo of fat and losing or gaining a kilo of muscle, which potentially might occur, well, we'll say over a month time period. I was going to say a week, but that's just completely ridiculous to gain a kilo of muscle per week. But that might occur over a month where you're like, yeah, I lost a kilo and I gained a kilo, I lost a kilo of fat, gained a kilo of muscle. And it's like a kilo of muscle is fairly significant. Like you pull out a kilo of meat from your fridge there and you'll be like, all right, you're probably going to notice that even if it is dispersed across your whole body, like you'll see a small increase in muscle size on, like, I don't know, your biceps, your calves, your fucking hamstrings, your glutes, whatever. You'll see or potentially even feel that slight increase, right? And obviously, if you're also losing a kilo of fat in that time frame, you'll be like, all right, that's, it becomes even more obvious, so once the numbers are quite large, it's fairly easy to keep track of because it's just visually you can be like, okay, I weigh the exact same, but Jesus, my delts are fucking capped now, so that's easy to see. However, as you progress, like naturally enough, you're going to be losing less fat and gaining less muscle, even if you are staying at the same weight, like effectively you've just slowly over time transitioned into a diet that just keeps you the same, like it just maintains, and even if your training is progressive and all of that is occurring, that you're like giving the stimulus and you are still progressing in the gym, the rate of progress in terms of muscle gain or fat loss can effectively grind to a halt, to an indistinguishable rate, where it's like, right, you've literally been doing this for 6 months and you had a great return on investment. You lost 6 kilos of fat and you gained 6 kilos of muscle, and now it's at a rate where it's like, I for the last 2 months, we'll say we're at the 8-month mark, you're like, nothing really has happened. I look the exact same. Like I've been taking pictures the whole time and nothing has changed. And maybe you do have a scale that is, bioimpedance or whatever. And like when you started, it was saying 16% body fat, and now it's saying 10% body fat, then you can be like, right, that 10% hasn't changed in the last 2 months, like some days, yeah, it's 9.9 and other days it's 10.2, but in and around, it's around the same for the last 2 months, and at this stage, generally what I would recommend doing is either going into a dedicated diet and losing the last little bit of fat that you want to lose, or going into a surplus and really progressing and chasing that muscle gain. So it depends on how your physique looks at the moment and then how you want it to look down the road. Or I say look, but that could also mean performance wise, you could be looking at performance metrics. Like if you want to have a higher, I don't know, squat to body weight ratio, it's like, well, obviously it's like you've a few ways to go about that. You can just get terrifyingly strong, or you can just get lighter. So it depends on exactly what you're looking for from the diet. But after about, or I shouldn't give a time frame, but once you start seeing progress slow to an indistinguishable rate, you can maybe milk that for 2 or 3 months more because you're still getting some result. It's just very, very slow. But generally what I'll recommend people doing is just going into a dedicated either gaining phase or fat loss phase. It allows them to see quicker results. And if we can just diet down, lose whatever 2 to 3 extra percent body fat, you drop whatever, we'll say 2 to 3 kilos, you do that over a 6 to 12 week time frame, it's like boom, like, man, you've completely transformed your physique, because over this entire year, we'll say, you gained significant muscle and now you're just showcasing it, you know. Or the opposite could be true, where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm actually relatively lean now. After my body recomposition, I was lean to start with, and it looks like I've gained a lot of muscle, but I want to gain more. So now you just flip the switch and go, right, now I'm going to be into a slight surplus, and really start chasing that over the next 2, 3, 5 years, you know, in this small surplus, interrupted by some small deficits every now and again to kind of tidy things up, you know. And that would be a great approach for a beginner, where you like do the first 6 months or so as eating at maintenance and just nailing nutrition habits, behaviors, absolutely nailing training. And then as the rate of gains of, you know, muscle gain and then also fat loss start to dwindle, then you just switch it into a small surplus and slowly keep that gain train going, you know, and do that for 5 years, and all of a sudden you're fucking 100 kilos jacked out of your mind, you know. So that's the process of progressing it. It's basically just keep going until results start to dwindle, and then you can't really do much about that. You've effectively tapped out the stimulus that's being provided, and you start having to think about switching your priorities then, and either go into a dedicated deficit or a dedicated surplus and start to tap things out with that. And that's going to be completely dependent on your goals and obviously where you are. Like if you have more body fat than you want, even though you've been seeing significant fat loss, you know, maybe you do go into a deficit. But if you're like, yeah, I'm pretty lean, I want more muscle, then you probably go into a surplus, you know. And again, we did episodes on that. Those surplus and deficit numbers don't need to be dramatic. Like it's not like just add 500 calories or drop 500 calories. Like they can be quite slow or quite low numbers, and then you can, you know, slowly milk that fat loss or slowly milk that muscle gain, you know. And the issue with the whole thing is, again, the trackability of this, you know, like the progressibility. It's just like, okay, eventually you're just going to have to tweak your calories to either eat less or eat more. It's pretty straightforward. Effectively, once you've milked the gains from your maintenance calories, you know, you've milked the body recomposition gains, then it just becomes, okay, now I'm back into a quote unquote normal population, and the normal rules apply, where if I want to gain some muscle, I have to eat in a surplus. If I want to lose some fat, I have to eat in a deficit, you know? So you effectively, after you've milked everything, you then just become a quote unquote normal population, you know? So all of the normal rules apply, right? So you do have to keep that in mind, that that's the progressibility of it, you know. It's, you just become a normal person. But the trackability of it, like this is, there is no easy way to track this, you know. Again, like the easiest way would be to get like DEXA scans every month, you know. But that's like 70 to 100 euro a pop, depending on where you live. It could be even more, you know. And that's obviously not exactly the most practical. But if you were doing this as a scientific experiment, that's probably what you would do, you know. Because that's, DEXA scan is the gold standard, even though it's not actually that great, you know. But if you're trying to do this at home, you're probably just going to have to rely on pictures, like taken in the same pose, same lighting, same time, etc. And then the scales, and maybe use some tape measures as well. You know, if you're like, I want to use my waist circumference and maybe my bicep size, my quad size, you know, and that gives you a good indication. Or maybe even your like chest size gives you a good indication that things are progressing. If your waist is going down and like your biceps are going up, it's like, all right, I'm probably gaining muscle, you know. If you do have a scales, I know like a lot of scales these days, they come with that bioimpedance stuff, you know. Maybe you have to shell out a little bit more than just getting that little digital scales from fucking, I don't know, Lidl or Aldi or something. But if you go to any kind of shop these days that sells scales, you can get a digital one for relatively cheap, especially if you're going to use it pretty much every day, and it gives you data then you can then use. You know, you probably can get some bioimpedance, and while it is not as consistent as you would like it to be, and it is not as accurate as you would like it to be, you can still use it and look at the trend over time, and then, you know, progress things based on how that is progressing. You know, if you notice, again, it's been stalled out for a month, 2 months at the same exact numbers, and you've been eating at maintenance, then you probably need to change something.
Yep, and the other thing would just be to keep an eye on your training. If you're hoping to gain muscle, then you would hope that, or you'd expect that in the gym across multiple sets, your strength in moderate repetition ranges. For example, if you're previously doing 3 sets of 10 at 100 kilos on the bench, and now you're able to do 3 sets of 15 at 100 kilos on bench, that's pretty good progress, and it will be an indicator that things are probably moving in the right direction. And obviously, the greater the effect that you see there, the more likely it is that you've gained muscle in that area. And it's not a perfect relationship, but it's definitely good enough when you look at those moderate repetition ranges and you look at it across multiple sets. If your 1 rep max increases, like, that could just be skill, it could just be practice. So that's why I suggest that kind of 6 to 15 rep range across multiple sets. That if your strength and performance is increasing across in those metrics, it's probably more likely that it's related to an increase in muscle size, especially if you were already accustomed to doing those exercises and those repetition ranges.
And I think the fact that it's like across multiple sets is also very important, because again, like a single set, that's to an extent a large skill component, but multiple sets, well, obviously there is quite clearly the same skill component. If you're doing it across multiple sets, that's more indicative of muscular adaptations have occurred that allow you to do this. And I say multiple sets, I mean like the normal, like 2 to 5 minute rest intervals. It's not like, I did multiple sets of 100 kilos for 12 reps, but I took 20 minutes in between each of those sets, that wouldn't be as indicative as, 3 sets done within a fucking 10-15 minute time frame.
Yep.
Anyway, do you have anything to add to this body recomposition debate, this body recomposition plan of action? Do you have anything to say?
The only thing is that when I woke up this morning, I was like, Jesus Christ, I am bollocks. And I didn't know why. I did not know why. I was so fucking tired. And I thought I was weak. I thought I was just after getting weak. And then I realized the clocks actually went forward, and that's why I was fucked. I only realized that now. I was like, oh shit. That's what happened. We lost an hour.
So did you not plan ahead and go to sleep an hour earlier?
I didn't. I actually went to bed late, and that's what fucked me. I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm never this tired after this much sleep. But yeah, weakness.
You hate to see it. But anyway, I've nothing else to add to this whole discussion. Basically, eat at maintenance, get sufficient protein, and milk it. If you think you're in a population that can get some body recomposition, that's how you do it. And then eventually transition into the normal people, us normies, who basically have to eat in a surplus or in a deficit to get the results that we want, So that's probably going to be the case. This episode is probably going to help a lot of people once they come out of this Corona time. Like, oh yeah, I got a little bit fatter because my diet wasn't, perfect, and maybe I lost some muscle because the stimulus wasn't there, or maybe you just didn't train. You're just like, oh, I hate this, I don't like training at home. So you're like, I'm just going to take 6 weeks off or whatever it is, whatever it eventually becomes, and you just go, yeah, I'm just going to go back into the gym come April, whenever we're allowed back, and then just go into a maintenance phase and watch the body respond, watch all the muscle gain and fat loss occur. Anyway, where can people find us? Where should they follow us, etc.?
As always, you can subscribe to the Triage Method newsletter below and get all of your updates, additional content, recommended resources, etc. You can also get involved in the Triage Method community, which is busier these days with content from others and from us. So I would recommend getting involved there. That's our free Facebook group linked down below. Additionally, of course, you can engage with our services, online coaching, group coaching online. So one-to-one and group online coaching, I should say, as well as our resources that are available in the store. So beginner's guidebook and training templates. The group coaching at the moment does have home training variations. So if you are stuck and you want more guidance than has been offered in the free templates that we've given out, the group coaching could be a good show for you, because we can, give you more support there, obviously. And then one-to-one coaching, if you really just, you want to get on the ball, boom, get to work on some goals. Like, that mightn't seem appropriate for many people right now. However, there are actually some people who could probably benefit more from starting one-to-one online coaching now than they would at a normal time, because they've got more time to be able to prepare their nutrition, to get their habits in order, to plan ahead before they do go back to work properly, and not have as many barriers in the way. Even if you can't get to a gym, you can still do lots at home. And that's not me just saying it. I'm saying it because personally, I'm probably finding it much easier to manage my own nutrition right now. And I actually had a client check in yesterday, and I was saying to him, look, I know this is a really stressful time. If there's anything I can do to support you, just let me know, whatever. And he was like, man, this is the easiest I've ever had it. Like, he's making great progress. He's like, I have time to cook my meals. It's great. So it's not all bad. And I know that some coaches have been talking about that as well, that, they've had some new clients come on and it's been a smoother process. So if it's something you're interested in, that option is available. And yeah, that's about it. You can, of course, follow our YouTube channel, Triage Method on YouTube, Triage Method on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and then you'll be all up to date on Triage.
100%. I should also add that we do have consultancy as well.
Yes.
We're doing actually a good few of those, because obviously coaches and stuff, that's the main people that are looking for this, and they have more time off. And obviously they're like, all right, well, I want to upskill in this area. What do you guys have to say about this? And then we just do an hour consult, talk through things. And yeah, that's been going well, because obviously we both have more time available to us, so we can do more calls, and obviously people are free to do that. But just on that topic of the nutrition and training being easier at this stage, like, it is one of those things which it is kind of counterintuitive, where you're kind of like, oh, well, the gyms aren't open and I can't do this. But like you were saying, Gary, like, a lot of my clients are in that position where they're still making great progress in this time. Maybe they picked up a few dumbbells from fucking Argos or something, and they've been really getting after it. But I know some people just weren't able to do that, and they're just getting after it with, push-ups, some chin-ups, pull-ups, different things, where it's like, we're still working on our goals. And this is the thing you're going to see, like, people who are obviously, we'll say, in the fitness industry, but not like working in it. Like, they just go to the gym and kind of that kind of stuff, and maybe they're listening to this. Like, some of them may not be fully in love with the process, and that's okay. I'm not saying you have to be, but they just effectively just sack off training for the next however many weeks, and they're going to come back and be in a relatively worse position than when this whole stuff started, And again, that's perfectly fine. Like, it's your life. You can do whatever the fuck you want to do. I don't care. But they're going to be in a relatively worse position. And then they're going to be looking around and seeing people that are like, oh yeah, I didn't lose any strength, or I actually gained muscle, or I lost fat, So there's no reason, even though it's a very annoying and unprecedented time, there's no reason to necessarily just give up on all your goals and be like, look, I'll start when the gyms open back up again, Like, the human body doesn't know if you're lifting weights, Like, you could be lifting fucking logs for all it cares, And obviously, humans evolved before weights, so I don't think they're a necessity to gain muscle. We've been pretty successful at doing it without weights for thousands, millennia. Like, you think about, like, resistance training as we know it, like weights and stuff, like, that's really only the 1920s onwards, 1930s, and really only came to prominence in the 1950s, onwards. So that's 70 years, So before that, obviously, there was like odd implement training, different things, and people were basically making resistance training equipment out of like old junkyard scrap or railroad scrap and that kind of things, and be like, oh, here's something that's really heavy. Let's see if you can lift it, like a fucking girder or some fucking shit. And it's like, all right, this weighs like 200 kilos. Let's deadlift it off blocks, that kind of shit. Like, that's what people were doing before this, so if they could do it with fuck all equipment, that they literally just built themselves, like you who can order something off Amazon and have it here in 2 days, you can get by. Now obviously, of course, there's a lot of people in the position where they've lost their job and maybe finances are tight and whatever else, and that's obviously a priority. However, resistance training, well, I was going to say resistance training, but training in general is a nice little stress reliever. And while it might not seem like it when you're sitting down there going, oh fuck, have to look at my budget, have to look at my finances, like going like, oh yeah, just do an hour of fucking training at home, it's like that might seem like the furthest thing away from what you need to do. However, it is a nice little relief, a little outlet for any pent up aggression, any pent up fucking anger, whatever. But yeah, I do know that people are in a poor position financially, well, potentially a poorer position financially, and it's completely out of your control, and that can lead to a feeling of a lack of confidence. I know a lot of personal trainers I've been talking to, they've been feeling that, where they've had their confidence knocked, where they're kind of like, oh fuck, like it almost feels like they've done something wrong. They've been building their business for the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and now all of a sudden it's fucking on death's door, because it's like, fuck, like I have no clients, the gyms are closed, and they obviously have to eat as well, maybe they have families, etc. But I think just keeping in mind that it's like this is not your fault, you didn't cause this issue, and realize that you didn't do anything wrong to be in this position. So all you can do is get through this whole situation and rebuild afterwards. So if that is you lost your job, or if it is that you are a personal trainer, coach, whatever, and your business now is like uncertain, you're not making money, etc., it's like you didn't do anything wrong. Like there's no need to feel shame, guilt, whatever. Like, yeah, you might not have the money now to pay for your fucking house for the next 3 months, and obviously that's a fucking huge issue. Pay your rent, pay whatever, and obviously that's a huge issue, but it's not your fault. So I think just getting rid of that kind of fault guilt aspect to it really does help people move forward with all of this kind of stuff. I know, like, because I've been talking to a lot of personal trainers about this, different coaches and stuff in the group, or like, obviously in my area, and they do kind of feel like a bit guilty, a bit like it's their fault. They should have done better. They should have done something. They should have been quicker to adapt, or whatever. But again, this is just an unprecedented situation, and it's just not your fault. And come whatever time the gyms open back up again, your business is going to open back up again. And yeah, if you lost your job and you work in, I don't know, the finance sector or something, it's like, yeah, you're probably going to be out. Like, I know I have like a few clients, 2 clients that are architects, and obviously architecture is heavily dependent on effectively a boom market. If no one's building houses, no one needs an architect. That's obviously not the exact case, but so they've lost their jobs and stuff. So that's not their fault as well. It's just, that's the economy that we're in, and as soon as you come back, jobs will be created again, and it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, so it's not your fault. Don't feel bad about yourself unless you are Xi Jinping. Exception, I think.
Dead right. You're going to be executed now, but
all right. It's my last public appearance.
Anyway, that is all we've got time for. I've nothing else to say. It is too easy, as we always say.
Goodbye, auf Wiedersehen, das vidania. What's Irish? Slán. Slán, Avalia.
Right, goodbye.